Alright, welcome to essentially another weekly report. Most successful, nah, I'm not going to say most, but I think a key to success is consistency and persistence. So, I will persist with this weekly podcast format until, I don't know, some miracle or something great comes to mind and I can pivot in a whole nother direction. So, here's number 50. Yay! And we're live! Okay, typical spiel. Hey guys! I have a drink. Diet Soda Wave. I don't have a guest or an audience yet, so my default safety net is the news. I also forget that podcasts are primarily an audio-only medium, mostly. But, so I will try to cater to, and I think the adjective is oral audience. I don't want to sound like I have a New England accent or anything, but... Okay, so here's how this is going to work, right? Because it's a weekly news report, I'm going to read the title, skim through the article, and I'm going to say these signaling words like I'm like corporate speak or something. I'm going to say, let's think about that for a second. And just a second, because I want to move on to the next article. That's what I'm going to say. I haven't compiled, but I've picked 3 of what I've determined to be unbiased, trustworthy news websites. I have the Pew Research Center, I have NPR, and I have BBC. If there are more trustworthy sites, I will look into them. But for now, these are the big 3 right now. I'm just going to read the top articles of each website because this is a report. Until further notice, until I get better ideas and more engaging discussions, this is a news report. So I'm just going to read the top articles from each website and see where that takes me. Let's start with the Pew Research Center. Statistics, yeah? All right, here we go. We're going to go from oldest to newest. Data essay published May 7th, 2025. Views of race, policing, and Black Lives Matter in the 5 years since George Floyd's killing. It's a news report, but it's a podcast, so to speak, so I'll add whatever necessary commentary into it. Okay. Let's skim this, right? Let's skim this. May 25th marks 5 years since George Floyd, an unarmed black man, was killed by a white police officer in Minneapolis. I need to know the history behind capitalizing the first letter in races. The officer, Derek Chauvin, was found guilty on charges of murder and manslaughter and sentenced to more than 20 years in prison. Floyd's murder, just months after the killings of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor. Floyd's murder, just months after the killings of Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, sparked nationwide protests. Millions of Americans marched in communities across the country, drawing attention to issues of racial inequality, including the treatment of black people by police. In June 2020, more than 8 in 10 U.S. adults said they were following news about the demonstrations 42%, or fairly closely, 42%. This was similar to the high level of attention Americans had been paying to news about COVID-19. The Black Lives Matter movement, which first rose to prominence in 2013 following George Zimmerman's acquittal in the shooting death of Trayvon Martin, say very. I don't know why somewhat is the middle. Why is somewhat the median here? Can we just say trustworthy? Because other places I've seen have somewhat is more on the negative side. We'll say very trustworthy. Why does the Pew Research Center want to know what level of education I have? Nothing yet. This is my first time in recent memory on the site. You're welcome. Reached a high point in favorability during the 2020 protests. This is also an exercise in reading. I feel like I've lost literacy over the past few years. With 67% of U.S. adults expressing support, and a Pew Research Center analysis shows that the use of the hashtag Black Lives Matter hashtag peaked following Floyd's killing. Some called... Oh, they have a little thing for terminology. Okay. Some called the summer of 2020 a time of racial reckoning in America, but in the years since, Americans have expressed growing skepticism that the events of 2020 produced significant change. In September 2020, 52% of U.S. adults said the increased focus on issues of race and racial inequality would lead to changes that would improve the lives of black people. 46% said it would not. This is a report. I'm really on autopilot just reading all of this right now. References to white, black, and Asian adults include those who are not Hispanic and identify as only one race. Hispanics are of any race. All references to party affiliation include those who lean toward that party. Republicans include those who identify as Republicans and those who say they lean toward the Republican Party. Democrats include those who identify as Democrats and those who say they lean toward the Democratic Party. Which statistic do I read first? Oh my gosh. I'm thinking twice. This is a work in progress. I'm thinking twice about reading this whole article. Okay, let's just keep going. We'll just keep reading and then we'll iterate on the fly. 5 years later, 72% say the increased focus on race and racial inequality after Floyd's killing did not lead to changes that improved the lives of black people. What's that? The footnote says, in the 2025 survey, questions that ask respondents to assess... Hi, Josh. To assess the impact of the increased attention to the issues of race and racial inequality following George Floyd's killing included the response option, don't know enough to say. This is because it may be difficult for some respondents to offer a response based on specific events that happened 5 years prior. Throughout this analysis, figures presented for those questions reflect only the views of those who did not indicate that they don't know enough to answer. When they say today, that is, May 7th. Josh, this is a news report until further notice. I don't know how else to fill the moments in these weekly podcast episodes. I want weekly podcast episodes, but this is my safety net for now. So I'll keep going. The share of Americans who express support for the Black Lives Matter movement stands at 52% today, a drop of 15 percentage points compared with June 2020. Commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion has also declined. Companies have pulled back on DEI initiatives, and workers' views of them have grown more negative. See, I like how they add these... Oh, it's Associated Press? They reference... Okay. Oh, okay. This was the case even before President Donald Trump signed an executive order eliminating DEI policies in the federal government and urging the private sector to do the same. Ooh, I like... This chart is interesting. The chart says most U.S. adults now say the focus on race after George Floyd's killing didn't lead to improvements for black Americans. Interesting. So in February 2025, for these audio listeners, 27% say led to changes, and 72% said did not lead to changes. Okay. More broadly, some Americans have grown more pessimistic that black people will eventually have equal rights with white people. Among those who say the country hasn't made enough progress on racial equality, 49 express doubt that black people will ever have equal rights with white people, up from 39% in 2020. In this data essay, we'll look back at how Americans were... Oh, it's a data essay, that's why it's so long. We'll look back at how Americans were thinking... I am illiterate. We'll look back at how Americans were thinking about race, racial inequality, and policing in the weeks and months following George Floyd's killing. We'll also explore how views about these issues have changed in the last 5 years and Americans' expectations for the future. All of these look equally salient. Okay. Views of police conduct turned more negative in the weeks following George Floyd's death. In June 2020, most U.S. adults said police around the country were doing an only fair or poor job of holding officers accountable for misconduct. Excuse me. Whoa. Treating racial and ethnic groups equally, and using the right amount of force for each situation. Each of these shares was at least 10 percentage points higher than it had been in 2016. Oh, interesting. Wait, it's higher. By 2023, views had become more positive, though fewer than half said police were doing an excellent or good job in each of these areas. Views of police have consistently varied by party and by race and ethnicity. Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents have more negative views than Republicans and Republican leaners. And black adults have more negative views than white and Hispanic adults. The number of Asian adults in the sample was too small to analyze separately. In 2023, nearly 9 in 10 Americans said they had personally seen videos of police violence against black people. Views of the impact of these videos were mixed. 45% of U.S. adults said the wide sharing of these videos in the news or on social media is a very or somewhat good thing. 63% said these videos make it a lot or somewhat easier to hold police officers accountable. 54% said they make it a lot or somewhat harder for police officers to do their jobs. Black adults and Democrats were the most likely to say these videos being widely shared is a good thing. There were also wide partisan differences in the shares saying these videos make it easier to hold police officers accountable. 76% of Democrats versus 50% of Republicans. When it comes to the impact on police officers' ability to do their job, 64% of white adults and 74% of Republicans said these videos make it harder. Fewer than half among other groups said the same. 5 years after George Floyd's death, we asked Americans how they see the relationship between police and black people in the United States. More than half of U.S. adults say things are about the same as before Floyd was killed. Footnote. The 2025 survey included the response option, don't know enough to say. This is because it may be difficult for some respondents to offer a response based on specific events that happened 5 years prior. In this analysis, figures reflect only the views of those who did not indicate that they don't know enough to answer. A third say things are now worse, while just 11% say things are better. Okay. Views differ by party. About 4 in 10 Republicans say the relationship between police and black people is now worse, compared with 28% of Democrats. Democrats are more likely than Republicans to say things are about the same as they were before Floyd's killing. Notably, these views don't vary much by race and ethnicity. George Floyd's killing sparked activism on social media on issues of race and racial equality. Social media activity using the hashtag Black Lives Matter hashtag, I'm just going to say Black Lives Matter hashtag, skyrocketed in the summer of 2020, with over 1.2 million public tweets posted on a single day in June 2020, according to our analysis of publicly available tweets from July 2013 through March 2023. Nearly 10 million distinct users tweeted the hashtag in the 5 months from May to September 2020. BLM. Because I'm ignorant, I don't remember. Was Philando Castile? I've heard, yeah. Oh, I see. Kyle Rittenhouse. Oh, I didn't remember it being during a BLM protest. Was it a BLM protest? During protests, so surely. Public support for the Black Lives Matter movement also reached a high mark in June 2020, when 67% of U.S. adults expressed support, according to our surveys. However, support quickly dropped. In September 2020, 55% of Americans said they supported the Black Lives Matter movement, a 12 percentage point decrease from a few months prior. And support had declined again by 2023, when about half of Americans said they supported the movement. Okay. Today, that's May 7th, 2025, support seems to have leveled off. Some 52% of Americans say they strongly or somewhat support the movement, and 45% say they oppose it. Over the years, support for the Black Lives Matter movement has remained high among black adults. Among black adults, Democrats, and young adults. That continues to be the case today, with majorities of these groups expressing support. 76% of black adults versus 61% each among Hispanic and Asian adults, and 45% of white adults. 84% of Democrats versus 22% of Republicans. 61% of 18 to 29-year-olds versus 54% of 30 to 49-year-olds, and 47% of those 50 and older. While about half of U.S. adults express support for the Black Lives Matter movement, a smaller share say the movement has been extremely or very effective at bringing attention to racism against black people. About half of black adults and 46% of Asian adults say the movement has been highly effective. This compares with 33% of Hispanic adults and 27% of white adults. In 2020, most Americans believe the increased focus on issues of race and racial inequality represented a change in the way most Americans thought about these issues. While some groups were more likely than others to say this, majorities across all racial and ethnic groups and political parties agreed. 5 years later, most U.S. adults still say the attention to racial inequality after George Floyd's murder represented a change in the way most Americans think about the issue. Footnote. In the 2025 survey, questions that asked respondents to assess the impact of the increased attention to issues of race and racial inequality following George Floyd's killing included the response option, "don't know enough to say." This is because it may be difficult for some respondents to offer a response based on specific events that happened 5 years prior. Throughout this analysis, figures presented for those questions reflect only the views of those who did not indicate that they don't know enough to answer. But the share saying it represented a major change dropped from 34% in 2020 to 24% today. There's also been a shift in how Americans see the impact the attention on race and racial inequality in summer 2020 has had on the lives of black people. In September 2020, 52% thought the increased attention to these issues would lead to changes that would improve the lives of black people. By 2023, 40% said that had happened. That figure stands at just 27% today. About 7 in 10 now say the increased focus on these issues after Floyd's murder did not lead to changes that improved the lives of black people. Hello, Timothy Lalamentic, with an exclamation mark. You seem particularly enthusiastic about this topic. Democrats have become especially skeptical of the impact the increased focus on race and racial inequality has had on the lives of black people. About a third of Democrats and those who lean Democratic now say the focus on these issues after Floyd's murder led to changes that improved the lives of black people. Roughly half the share, 70%, roughly half, who thought this would happen in September 2020. The change has been more modest among Republicans and Republican leaners, 21% today versus 31% in 2020. Americans across racial and ethnic groups are now less likely than they were in 2020 to say the increased focus on race and racial inequality after Floyd's murder led to changes that improved the lives of black people. As was the case then, today's answers vary little by race and ethnicity, if at all. After George Floyd's killing, individuals weren't the only ones paying attention to issues of race. Companies were also engaging in the conversation. Many companies publicly denounced racism following the protests, and their statements were noticed by the public. 80% of U.S. adults said in July 2020 that they had seen or heard companies and organizations making statements about these issues in the months prior to the survey. A majority of Americans who said they had seen or heard public statements about race or racial inequality said pressure from others to address the issue was a driving reason for companies' actions. A much smaller share said genuine concerns about the treatment of black people in the country were a large reason for these statements. Overall, Americans were split about how important it was for companies to make statements about politics or social issues. 52% thought this was very or somewhat important, and 48% said it was not too or not at all important. Today, these shares remain similar, with Americans split down the middle on whether or not this is important for companies to do. Views of how much attention is paid to issues of race in our country overall are virtually unchanged from 5 years ago. About 4 in 10 Americans say there is too much attention paid to these issues, while 35% say there's too little attention, and 23% say it's about right. Black adults continue to be the most likely to say there is too little attention paid to issues of race. And white adults continue to be the most likely to say there is too much attention paid to race and racial issues. There are even wider gaps by party. 56% of Democrats say there's too little attention paid to these issues, compared to 12% of Republicans. 66% of Republicans say there's too much attention on these issues, compared with 17% of Democrats. Half of U.S. adults say they feel exhausted extremely or very often when thinking about the state of race and racial issues in the U.S. today. This is larger than the shares who say they often experience other feelings we asked about. Over half of Democrats and 48% of Republicans say they feel exhausted when they think about these issues. There are larger differences by party when it comes to other feelings. By 10 percentage points or more, Democrats are more likely than Republicans to say they extremely or very often feel angry and fearful. In turn, by double-digit margins, Republicans are more likely than Democrats to say they frequently feel each of the following when they think about the state of race in the U.S. these days, that being uninterested, hopeful, and satisfied. While some thought the summer of 2020 as a time of racial reckoning, views about the state of racial equality in America changed only slightly between 2019 and 2020. In September 2020, 49% of Americans said the country hadn't gone far enough on racial equality for black people, up from 45% in 2019. Today, that figure stands at 43%. As was true in 2019 and 2020, views on the country's progress on racial equality still vary by race and political party. 82% of black Americans say the nation has not gone far enough when it comes to black people having equal rights with white people. About half or fewer among white, Hispanic, and Asian Americans say this. 71% of Democrats and Democratic leaners say the country hasn't gone far enough, compared with just 14% of Republicans and Republican leaners. Among those who say the country hasn't gone far enough, Many cited Donald Trump or specific ways in which black people are treated unfairly when asked about this in an open-ended question. Open-ended responses have been lightly edited for spelling, punctuation, and style. Do I read these? I don't know if I want to read these. For time's sake, I've spent 20 plus minutes on this article. I was right when I said I had to iterate in real time. Okay, I'll read it. This is part of the itinerary. To quote a black Republican in their mid-40s, the justice system is not fair when it comes to black people. When convicted of crimes, black people always get heavier sentences than their white counterparts, even when they have no prior convictions and come from similar backgrounds as their white counterparts. To quote a black Democrat in their early 70s. Wait. Interesting. Black people are still paid less than whites when both are performing the same job. Black people are still looked at as criminals when they haven't committed any crimes. Blacks have a difficult time securing loans to finance a small business or purchase a home. To quote a white Democrat in their mid-30s, we have started moving backwards in the equal rights progression we've made over the years. With a president like Trump who's getting rid of Black History Month, inclusivity and special initiatives that ensure people of color and underrepresented people have equal opportunities, this will surely set us back decades. Among those who think the country has gone too far, many say there is too much emphasis on race in the country these days. Some cite affirmative action or diversity, equity, and inclusion programs, DEI programs, in the workplace when asked in what ways they think the country's gone too far. To quote a white Republican in their mid-70s, the country has forgotten Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s I've Got a Dream speech. I've Got a Dream speech content concerning judging others on the character rather than the color of their skin. To quote a white Republican in the early 40s, affirmative action is not fair for white people. Less qualified black people getting a job over a more qualified white person because they're black. That's it. Okay. Management being scared to fire a person because of their race when they've done something that deserves to get them fired. To quote a Hispanic Democrat in their late 40s, it's to the point that if a black person doesn't get what they want, it's racist. If they get caught wrong and to not face consequences, it's racist, etc. In recent years, Americans have become less optimistic about the future of racial equality for black people. Among those who say the U.S. still has work to do in this area, 51% now say it is very or somewhat likely that black people will eventually have equal rights with white people. This is down from 60% in September 2020. As was the case 5 years ago, most white adults who say the country still has work to do say it's likely that black people will eventually have rights with white people. This is much larger than the shares of black, Hispanic, and Asian adults who say the same. 2/3 of black adults who think the country hasn't made enough progress on racial equality say that eventual equality with white people is not too or not at all likely. About 6 in 10 Asian adults and 49% of Hispanic adults say the same. When asked about their expectations for Donald Trump's handling of issues related to race in his second term, it's the root beer, more say the president will make the things worse than say he will make things better. About a quarter say Trump won't make much difference on these issues. Expectations of Trump's handling of issues related to race differ widely by party. 82% of Democrats, but just 14% of Republicans, think he'll make things worse. 53% of Republicans say Trump will make things better, compared with just 5% of Democrats. Okay. I'm gonna skip about this project methodological note and acknowledgements. Okay. Well, as per the itinerary, let's think about that for a second. And just a second, because I want to move on to the next article. So here's what I thought about in real time, how to do this, right? I read through that whole article. I think a skim through that this article is just so dense with information. I looked through, I try to internalize every sentence of this article, and in my opinion, every sentence in this article is salient. So to skim over this article and dismiss it, it would be a disservice, I think. Unless I lack the skills to properly summarize. But then again, I might miss out on information. Again, this is a news report. This is the backup plan until, you know, we get people. So I've read through that whole article. Now I'll just say the titles of the other prominent articles. So we have a data essay. What is news? How much discrimination do Americans say groups face in the U.S.? 30% of Americans consult astrology, tarot cards, or fortune tellers. 30% of Americans. That's statistically 3 in 10. That's a different topic. I'll follow up with that. Pew Research Center Astrology. I guess, whatever. And the capstone article. What web browsing data tells us about how AI appears online. That's the Pew Research Center. It took me 30 minutes to cover the bare minimum of what I wanted to today. Now we're going to move on to NPR. We're just going to read the top headline. Yeah, we're just going to read the top headline. NPR sometimes struggles. Come on, NPR. Okay, this was today at 1:23 p.m. Eastern. And it's shorter. China is now the biggest debt collector in the developing world, report says. China has dramatically curtailed its lending in recent years. Now it's emerging as the largest debt collector for many of the world's poorest nations, a shift that threatens to undermine poverty reduction efforts and fuel instability, according to a new report. Lending for China's Belt and Road Initiative, which includes funding for a massive series of new railways, ports and roads in the developing world, began winding down before the COVID-19 pandemic, according to Peak Repayment, China's global lending, released this month by Australia's Lowy Institute, a foreign policy think tank. The report points to diplomatic pressure within China to restructure unsustainable debt and to recover outstanding debts from abroad for the change. Maybe now I think about it, what if I do a heavily biased news source next time? I'm going to add that to the ideas. Central versus left versus right news sources. Oh, there's a website for that. I forgot what it was called, though. Okay. I think I said that. The report points to diplomatic pressure within China to restructure unsustainable debt and to recover outstanding debts from abroad for the change. Skeptics have argued for years that China's lending to the developing world is aimed at laying a debt trap for borrowing governments. But the director of the China-Africa Research Initiative at the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies said it's useful to view China's lending as driven more by commercial logic than overt political leverage. She says lenders in China are in the process of learning from their past missteps. The Chinese are on a, to quote, the Chinese are on a steep learning curve as far as debt restructuring goes, she says. We're going to be seeing a transition, much more care about debt sustainability. I'm going to Google Translate this name to try and be as objective as possible about this. I'm going to Google Translate this name.
Brotigam.
Brotigam. Okay, sure. Brotigam says the first phase of Chinese lending was led by the state-owned China Export-Import Bank. But as those loans have tailed off, commercial banks have taken their place. They were hit by the pandemic, by the difficulties some countries were having in repaying these debts, but they are still continuing to explore opportunities overseas, she says. As of 2023, more than a quarter of the external debt in developing countries was owed to China, the report says. Collectively, those countries are expected to pay at least $35 billion to Beijing this year alone. These include nations with, oh my gosh, these include nations throughout Africa, South America, and the Pacific Islands, as well as South, Central, and Southeast Asia, the report says. Not all countries who owe money have been affected by China's retrenchment on lending, namely some of China's neighbors and developing countries that possess critical minerals or battery metals seen as vital by Beijing, such as the Democratic Republic of Congo, with significant reserves of lithium and nickel. But for others that borrowed from Chinese financial institutions in the 2010s, debt servicing is now crowding out the development spending, according to the report. A 2023 Associated Press analysis of the dozen countries most indebted to China, including Pakistan, Kenya, Zambia, Laos, and Mongolia, found debt servicing payments were consuming vitally needed tax revenue for schools, electricity, food, and fuel. The burden from Chinese debts coming due is also a part of a broader set of severe headwinds, particularly for the poorest and most vulnerable economies, the Lowy Institute report says. Those headwinds include the impact of U.S. tariffs and the fact that an increasingly isolationist United States and a distracted Europe are withdrawing or sharply cutting their global aid support, the report says. One big issue, according to Brotigam, is that U.S. foreign assistance has come by way of grants since the end of the last debt crisis. But China's assistance is almost entirely in the form of loans. Those loans typically had 3 to 5 year grace periods, which began to expire in the early 2020s, the report says. Without fresh concessional financing or coordinated relief, the squeeze on budgets in debtor countries will tighten further, deepening development setbacks and heightening instability risks. That squeeze has already had repercussions, particularly in Africa. For example, Chinese lending accounts for approximately 10% of external debt in Kenya, where a China-funded Nairobi-Mombasa rail line has come to be viewed by some as corrupt and underperforming, according to a working paper published in March by Aid Data, a research lab at William & Mary. William & Mary! Yay! Cool. Chinese debt also became a key election issue there. William Ruto won Kenya's presidency in part by employing populist appeals that stoked anti-China sentiment. The case of Kenya shows how foreign debt can affect the public in a debtor country and potentially influence domestic politics and international relations, Aid Data's working paper stated. In 2022, Sri Lanka also faced the consequences of massive debt. On the verge of financial collapse, it defaulted on its external debt and was forced to restructure the $4.2 billion it owed to China, its largest lender. Such a default makes it harder for a country to borrow and can undermine confidence in the currency and economy. Let's think about that for a second. in just a second because I want to move on to the next article. So, that is our NPR article for this week. Oh, please help me. I gotta refresh the page. Other prominent articles include Federal Trade Court blocks Trump from imposing tariffs under emergency powers law. Shooting outside Jewish museum raises questions about shifts in political violence. This one I'm going to abbreviate a little bit because YouTube won't like me for saying that. Tate brothers face trafficking charges in the UK. Peruvian farmer loses landmark climate case against German energy giant. Wow. Okay. Next. BBC. Alright. The capstone article. Here we go. Similar format, these websites. This one is the terrifying new weapon changing the war in Ukraine. Alright. I will also Google Translate this. Nope. We're gonna use Ukrainian as the reference.
Родинська.
Rodinska.
Родинська.
Rodinska.
Rodinsky.
Rodinsky. An acrid smell hangs over the town of Rodinska. A couple minutes after we drive into the city, we see where it's coming from. A 250-kilogram glide bomb has ripped through the town's main administrative building and taken down 3 residential blocks. We're visiting a day after the bomb struck, but parts of the wreckage are still smoking. From the edges of the town, we hear the sound of artillery fire and of gunshots. Ukrainian soldiers shooting down drones. Rodinska is about 15 kilometers north of the embattled city of Do I say it with the... Pokrovsk.
Покровськ.
In the embattled city of Pokrovsk. Russia has been trying to capture it from the south since the autumn of last year, but Ukrainian forces have so far managed to stop Russian soldiers from marching in. So Russia has changed tactics, moving instead to encircle the city, cutting off supply routes. Routes. In the past 2 weeks, as hectic diplomatic efforts to bring about a ceasefire in Ukraine have failed. Russia has intensified its push, making its most significant advances since January. We find proof of that in Rodinska. Within minutes of us arriving in town, we hear a Russian drone above us. Our team runs to the closest cover available. A tree. What is that? What will that... We press up against it so the drone won't see us. Then there's the sound of a loud explosion. It's a second drone making impact nearby. The drone above us is still hovering. For a few more minutes, we hear the terrifying whirring sound of what's become the deadliest weapon of this war. When we can't hear it anymore, we take the chance to run to hard cover in an abandoned building 100 feet away. From the shelter, we hear the drone again. It's possible it returned after seeing our movement. That Rodinska is being swarmed by Russian drones is evidence that the attacks are coming from positions much closer than known Russian positions to the south of Pokrovsk. They were most likely coming from newly captured territory on a key road running from the east of Pokrovsk to
Костянтинівка.
Konstantinivka. I'm sorry. Kostyantinivka. After half an hour of waiting in the shelter, when we can't hear the drone anymore, we move quickly to our car parked under tree cover and speed out of Rodinska. By the side of the highway, we see smoke billowing and something burning. It's most likely a downed drone. Oh, man.
Билтиш. Билтиск.
We drive to Biltisk, further away from the front line. We see a row of houses wait. Oh, okay. Oh, there's video footage! We see a row of houses destroyed by a missile strike overnight. One of them was Svetlana's home. It's getting worse and worse. Earlier we could hear distant explosions. They were far away. But now our town is getting targeted. We're experiencing it ourselves, says the 61-year-old, as she picks up a few belongings from the wreckage of her home. Luckily, Svetlana wasn't at home when the attack occurred. Go into the center of the town. You'll see so much that is destroyed there. And the bakery and zoo have been destroyed too, she says. At a safe house just out of reach of drones, we meet soldiers of the artillery unit of the 5th Assault Brigade. You can feel the intensity of Russian assaults increasing. Rockets, mortars, drones. They're using everything they have to cut off supply routes going into the city, says Serhiy. His unit has been waiting for 3 days to deploy to their positions, waiting for cloud cover or high-speed winds to give them protection from drones. In an ever-evolving conflict, soldiers have had to rapidly adapt to new threats posed by changing technology. And the latest threat comes from fiber-optic drones. A spool of tens of kilometers of cable is fitted to the bottom of a drone, and the physical fiber-optic cord is attached to the controller held by the pilot. The video and control signal is transmitted to and from the drone through the cable, not through radio frequencies. This means it can't be jammed by electronic interceptors, said a soldier with the call sign Moderator, a drone engineer with the 68th Jaeger Brigade. When drones began to be used in this war in a big way, both militaries fitted their vehicles with electronic warfare systems, which can neutralize drones. That protection has evaporated with the arrival of fiber-optic drones, and in the development of these devices, Russia currently has the edge. Ukraine is trying to ramp up production. Russia started using fiber-optic drones much before us, while we were still testing them. These drones can be used in places where we have to go lower than usual drones. We can even enter houses and look for targets inside, said Venia, a drone pilot with the 68th Jaeger Brigade. We've started joking that maybe we should carry scissors to cut the cord. Says Serhiy, the artilleryman. Fiber-optic drones do have drawbacks. They are slower, and the cable could get entangled in trees. But at the moment, their widespread use by Russia means that transporting soldiers to and from their positions can often be deadlier than the battlefield itself. When you enter a position, you don't know whether you've been spotted or not. And if you have been spotted, then you may already be living the last hours of your life, says Oles, Chief Sergeant of the Reconnaissance Unit of the 5th Assault Brigade. This threat means that soldiers are spending longer and longer in their positions. Oles and I'm going to assume it's Oles. Oles and his men are in the infantry, serving in the trenches right at the very front of Ukraine's defense. It's rare for journalists these days to speak to infantrymen, as it's become too risky to go to these trenches. We meet Oles and Maxim in a rural home converted into a makeshift base, where the soldiers come to rest when they're not on deployment. The longest I spent at the position was 31 days, but I do know guys who have spent 90 and even 120 days there. Back before the drones arrived, the rotations could have been between 3 or 7 days at the position, says Maxim. War is blood, death, wet mud, and a chill that spreads from head to toe. And this is how you spend every day. I remember one instance where we didn't sleep for 3 days, alert every minute. The Russians kept coming at us wave after wave. Even a minor lapse would have meant we were dead. Oles says Russia's infantry has changed its tactics. Earlier they attacked in groups. Now they only send 1 or 2 people at times. They also use motorcycles, and in a few instances, quad bikes. Sometimes they slip through. What this means is that the front lines in some parts are no longer conventional lines, with the Ukrainians on one side and the Russians on the other, but more like pieces on a chessboard during play, where positions can be intertwined. This also makes it harder to see advances made by either side. We'll look at that. Interesting. Despite Russia's recent gains, it will not be quick or easy for it to take the whole of the Donetsk region, where Pokrovsk lies. Ukraine has pushed back hard, but it needs a steady supply of weapons and ammunition to sustain the fight. And as the war enters a 4th summer, Ukraine's manpower issues against a much bigger Russian army are also evident. Most of the soldiers we meet joined the military after the war began. They've had a few months of training, but have had to learn a lot on the job in the middle of a raging war. Maxim worked for a drinks company before he joined the military. I asked how his family copes with the job. It's hard. It's really hard. My family really supports me. But I have a 2-year-old son, and I don't get to see him much. I do video call him, though, so everything is as fine as it could be under the circumstances. He trails off, eyes welling up with tears. Maxim is a soldier fighting for his country, but he's also just a father, missing his 2-year-old boy. Let's think about that for a second. And just a second, because I want to move on to the next article. I say that, but I'm just going to read the Eminem. Whoa. What? When did this come out? 14 hours ago? Alright. Did this just update? Wait, what was I reading then? Oh my gosh, they updated this in real time? It's a different headline. Crazy. Anyway. Articles include Trump administration to aggressively revoke visas of Chinese students. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says the move will include those with connections to the Chinese Communist Party or studying with in critical fields? What does that mean? We'll look back on that once I read the rest of the... Students say they regret applying to U.S. schools after visa changes. And this new headline. U.S. Trade Court rules Trump overstepped his authority with global tariffs. Cassie Ventura needed stitches after Diddy beating, trial hears. Gaza warehouse broken into by hordes of hungry people, says WFP. UK prosecutors say 21 charges authorized against Tate brothers. Carney says he wants Canada to join major European defense plan. And the one that caught my eye, because, you know, I try to, you know, hip-hop when I can. The Eminem album that sparked outrage in the thousands. Warning, this article contains offensive language and descriptions of violence. That's Eminem's 3rd studio album? Is it? BBC. Let me remember. Oh, Infinite. Right. His discography. Yep, Infinite, Slim Shady LP, and Marshall Mathers LP. Yep, that's right. I'm forgetting my own stuff. Cause Shady. Yep. Punch a hole through the political correctness of his era. Wow. I don't know what else to say. Part of me thinks that if I had more sleep, I could offer and unlock more salient points. Oh, well, I guess I could talk about future ideas. Here's my list of future ideas. Here's my list of future ideas, right? Oops. I've been told to talk about the consummate college experience. And some of these are just my ideas. The East-West rap battle. I don't want to say beef. Superficially doesn't seem personal. Pew Research Center astrology, based on that article that I skimmed over. Central versus left versus right news sources, because I want to see, you know, how different sides take a stance on something. I don't know for the same topic, but a stance. And then lastly, video games or stuff I'm actually interested in. To be honest, what did we even look at? We looked at views of race, policing, and BLM in the 5 years since George Floyd's killing. Unless somebody wants to come on and convince me otherwise. What else? What else? Really? Did they update this one in real time too? China is now the biggest debt collector in the developing world. I did read that China is a loan grabber, but I don't want to put labels on people. There's new thing. And finally, the terrifying new weapon changing the war in Ukraine. Fiber optic drones. Yeah, fiber optic drones. That's about the extent I can extract from these articles with my root beer addled brain. Zero sugar. Zero sugar. Not much else I can say about today other than if people, you know, I'm far from the golden age of podcasting I did back in the day where we would have multiple people on and we would just riff and whatever. These days, just gonna let them come to me. This is always gonna be public. These things. This is a numbers game. I'm gonna let the numbers speak for themselves. But yeah, this is a glorified news report. Right now, if somebody were to ask me what makes my podcast special, I'm going to say nothing really at this moment. It's a news report. Anybody can report the news. I read these articles verbatim. In this moment, this podcast is nothing special. But let's see where it'll take me. Become the next Joe Rogan. I don't know. I'm also killing time until I fill out the hour because I like the look of an hour more than 30 minutes. But going into that Eminem article, I'm looking at that Eminem article. Is this just the album's intent? Yep. Political correctness. Whoa! A Stone Cold Steve Austin drop. It makes complete sense then at the... Wait. it makes complete sense then that at the turn of the century, professional wrestling had a huge boom in business. Thanks to Stone Cold Steve Austin. South Park was massive, as was aggressive and lewd nu metal like Limp Bizkit and Korn. Eminem's rebellion, snark, and inappropriateness were all definitely in. I love that. Professional wrestling. I like that. I like that intersectionality. Yeah, shout out Steve Austin. Really. But that's it from me. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Goodbye.